Over time, lots of pieces of information inside of the community can end up getting lost. People don't actually look into things or cite their sources, so therefore sources of information can get lost over the years. One piece of information that's seemingly been lost over the years is the fact that we've been given pretty accurate information from Scott Cawthon himself as into what was going on with the Five Nights at Freddy's series. He went on to say multiple times that after Five Nights at Freddy's 3, the story was over. He went on to say multiple times after Five Nights at Freddy's 4 that the story was over, even going as far as to say he didn't intend on bringing Springtrap back because the story didn't amount for it yet. It was only when he started continuing to write the story that he decided to bring characters like William back into the game's timeline. The reason why these things are important is because it gives you a pretty good understanding of where Scott's mind was when he was developing these games. It was never intended that certain characters would end up becoming important and would keep their importance throughout the entire series. Rather, he was putting down puzzle pieces that he decided to expand upon as the years would go on. That's just how storytelling tends to be. With that being said, he would tell us on an update referring to the Halloween update for Five Nights at Freddy's 4 a lot of information that people have seemingly forgotten. Most notably in reference to Underneath the Box, or in the box discussion, in which he would say that when it comes to Part 1, in reference to Five Nights at Freddy's 1, that everyone had found every piece of lore that was inside of the game. When it came to Part 2, people did it again, and when it came to Part 3, once again, the community uncovered every single piece of lore, meaning that FNAF 1 through 3 has been completely solved by the Five Nights at Freddy's community, or at the very least have found every secret that's hidden within inside of the games. However, when it came to FNAF 4, during that time, no one had been able to solve the series whatsoever. Theorists, no one. It was not solved. But we're not here to talk about FNAF 4 not being solved. Instead, we're going to be talking about another mention that he would go on to blatantly say that people have forgotten over the years, which is mentioning that Game Theory had made a video referring to Part 2, that being Five Nights at Freddy's 2, in which Scott confirmed that he got almost everything right. That's a fairly strange statement to make, considering what that video actually contains, but we'll end up getting into it here in a second. In fact, people would end up bringing up this very thing, considering that that video would go on to bring up an idea of Phone Guy being the purple guy, something that Matthew had believed for years and even kept believing even after multiple games and things had proven that that wasn't the case. Despite this, Scott went on record to say that almost everything in that video is right, fairly clearly referring to the fact that Purple Guy and Phone Guy are not the same person. So, if that's the case, then that must mean that an awful lot of the information stated within inside of that video has to be accurate, excluding the Phone Guy being Purple Guy argument, right? Well, you would think so. I went and rewatched the video so that way I was able to jot down some pieces of information that he had basically said inside of the video, so that way we could determine what piece of information Scott determined as almost solving the series and what he didn't. Most notably, he would end up bringing up the fact that Five Nights at Freddy's 2 is in fact a prequel, taking place in 1987. We already knew this is a pretty good established fact by this point in time, but he would also go on to say that this was evidence that his previous theory of Five Nights at Freddy's 1 taking place in 1993 to be true, which could be more information suggesting that FNAF 1 taking place in 1993 was a confirmed fact at that period of time. Whether or not Scott decided to change that piece of information or not is completely up for speculation, but as it currently stands, suggesting that almost everything was right inside of that video, and this video goes on to say 1993 was the year of Five Nights at Freddy's 1, it would seem to be a pretty good piece of information to say that that was a fact. Going on, he would also go on to mention the Take Cake minigame, referring to it as the first event within the series up to that point, taking place at Fredbear's Family Diner, due to the fact that there was only one animatronic here. The reason why this is weird is because this statement about MatPat actually solving the series this far forward was released after the events of Five Nights at Freddy's 4. It was quite literally in the Halloween update post, which means Fredbear's Family Diner was already shown to have been where they housed the Golden animatronics, with Golden Freddy / Fredbear and the Spring Bonnie animatronic, which becomes a little weird because Freddy with inside of that game is not golden whatsoever. He is flat out just the same color as normal Freddy. So does that mean that this piece of information is debunked? Well, we'll bring that back up here in a bit. He would also go on to mention pieces of information saying that the Take Cake incident is actually what resulted in Fredbear's Family Diner selling itself to Fazbear Entertainment. This is fairly strange considering that nowadays we know that Fazbear Entertainment existed before Fredbear's Family Diner actually existed. It gets into murky waters in suggesting whether or not Henry Emily actually operated this location before he ever got into business with William Afton. It becomes a fairly difficult process because it does suggest that by 1978 or 1979 that the Fazbear gang is already set up to exist, and we already see Fredbear's Family Diner posters this early inside of the timeline, which would suggest that it is created by Fazbear Entertainment. This location, we know at the very least, Henry built the animatronics for the location, although the way that this would kind of imply is that William and Edwin kind of worked together, or at the very least, maybe William started out with Fazbear Entertainment, originally running it with a toy shop and masks and everything of that sort, before expanding by purchasing out both Edwin and Henry Emily, and that way it would all become a part of the Fazbear Entertainment brand. It's just fairly strange, and I feel like that one's more up for interpretation, but I do have it circled for being a little strange because from what we've noticed so far, there doesn't seem to be anything suggesting that William and Henry didn't co-found Fredbear's Family Diner. It's always referred to them as co-founders, that the two of them created Fredbear's Family Diner. But then how can they build Fredbear's Family Diner and also buy it? It doesn't really work timeline-wise. More information that he would go on to say is due to the fact of the Springtrap character not existing yet, MatPat would continue to go on about Golden Freddy being the character that William used to lure the children. Now, it's up for, again, interpretation as to whether or not this was simply in reference to during the time of Five Nights at Freddy's 2, it was the Golden Freddy animatronic, but you have to remember that this post was released after FNAF 4 had already been released. We were already accustomed to the Fredbear and Spring Bonnie character, so that means, despite the fact that we've been shown and suggested that the Spring Bonnie character was the one used for the MCI, thanks to future games like Fruity Maze, would they suggest that during the time of Five Nights at Freddy's 4, even as far back then, Scott considered the MCI to have been done by someone in a Golden Freddy suit, not a Spring Bonnie suit? Of course, that would go against the FNAF 3 phone calls, which flat out say that a Spring Bonnie animatronic was noticeably moved. So this would obviously also have to go on the list of pieces of information that were debunked and were no longer the case as of Five Nights at Freddy's 4. He would also later go on to suggest the idea of Puppet Stuffed. Puppet Stuffed is a fairly popular idea within the Five Nights at Freddy's community, going over the concept of Charlie, or the puppet, stuffing the children into the animatronic suits to give them life. However, as we've been shown with both the movie and the books, it's been heavily suggested that William was the one who stuffed him, let alone the fact that the puppet didn't exist back in the original Five Nights at Freddy's 1 game. The only information that we knew was that Afton was the one who stuffed the children. The killer was the one who stuffed the children. That was basically what the story had told us. I understand some theorists still do believe in Puppet Stuffed, but as it currently stands, we've been shown over and over that William Afton is the one blamed for the situation, let alone that it would kind of put a bit of blame onto Charlie being the reason that the characters are still stuck there. And as we currently stand, we have no information to suggest she is the reason why the children were stuck there. Charlie possessed the puppet without being stuffed, so then how could they be given life? Let alone in the future we'd end up seeing the potential DCI event, which fairly clearly doesn't show the characters get stuffed into the animatronics, let alone the fact that characters like Mangle can't have somebody stuffed inside of them. They're quite literally just an endoskeleton. There's nowhere to stuff the body inside of. You then also have basically every other interpretation, also including no sign of the puppet, and yet things are able to be possessed. It just doesn't make sense for Puppet Stuff to be the direction that Scott wants the story to at least be now. It could have potentially been the direction of the story as of Five Nights at Freddy's 4, it just fairly clearly isn't the position of the story this late into the continuity. So I'm going to have to put this as another piece of information that MatPat got wrong. The other pieces of information that he would go on to state would be like the Night 5 phone call being about the DCI. That's something that I've said isn't the case. However, I have been told by multiple people that rather it's an interpretation of Phone Guy just now finding out information from the investigation going on. He wasn't being looped in on the information that was going on, they just knew an investigation was going on. It wasn't until they started asking around about, hey, did a potential employee use one of the yellow suits, made him realize, oh yeah, 1985 someone used one of the yellow suits. Oh shit, someone used one of the yellow suits again. Hence why he sounds so upset during that event, because that's when he just found out that information. It had suddenly gone from something he wasn't in the know about, he just knew about rumors of missing children, to, oh shit, those children probably are dead. This is probably something real. We then go on to get the infamous Phone Guy is William information, which of course we now know is debunked thanks to Scott himself. However, we would also, the very last ending piece would be the very fact that the puppet is in the Five Nights at Freddy's 1 location. Now, there are technically two pieces of information that would kind of suggest this to be the case, that being the music box area inside of the UCN, in which the puppet is inside of the kitchen with Chica, just chilling in there with her music box going round and round and round. It most likely was put on some sort of automation system, I'm not sure, just something to keep the puppet inside of the kitchen if that's the case. We also never really see the full kitchen, I don't believe, inside of Help Wanted either, so again, it's completely possible that the puppet was at the FNAF 1 location. And then you also have the scrap story of You're the Band, so people don't use it for lore information, but You're the Band does confirm that the puppet was at the FNAF 1 location. But of course, since it's considered a scrap story, you have to take that with a grain of salt as to whether or not you want to use that as an actual lore piece. And that is all the information that I could have gotten out of the part 2 video that Game Theory did back then. It gives us a lot of good information, depending on whether or not it can actually be useful or not. It suggests that by the time of FNAF 4, FNAF 1 really was in 1993. That Take Cake to the Children was set at Fredbear's Family Diner in some way, shape, or form. That the Night 5 phone call in FNAF 2 was in reference to the DCI, that the puppet is in the FNAF 1 location, and then also potentially suggests that Fredbear's was sold to Fazbear Entertainment, that William used the Golden Freddy suit for the MCI, and that the puppet stuffed the children's bodies. Those last three I just don't see being the case at all, let alone the Phone Guy is William theory, which then kind of makes the whole idea of MatPat almost solving FNAF 2 be kind of more of he got half of it right. I don't think that'd really be considered getting almost everything right. So it kind of makes me wonder whether or not Scott had actually remembered what had happened inside of this video, or whether or not we're just ignoring pieces of information that I suppose would be canon potentially at the time and potentially still canon. It just causes a bunch of headaches because we've already been given information in the later games that go against these pieces of information. So it's up to us to determine whether or not Scott's word for this situation should still be taken as fact. He did say that this video got almost everything right. But then we look at the pieces of information and there's just some things here that just can't be right. Again, it's completely up to you to determine what you want to believe. At the end of the day, this is just a theory by Game Theory, and I just wanted to look through Game Theory's theory, so that way I was able to understand what Scott Cawthon was referring to there. At the end of the we still don't know everything. I'm not Scott Cawthon, MatPat's not Scott Cawthon. We don't know the truth of what he wants the story to be. We can only utilize the pieces of information that he's given us, and that is all the information that I could find within inside of that book. What does it confirm to me? It semi-confirms that FNAF 1 should take place, at least as of FNAF 4, should take place in 1993. It makes the most sense, considering that's 10 years after the events of FNAF 4. It's a connection to Michael Afton, who we would end up playing as again. It's directly connected to each other, let alone the story that would come out shortly after would be The Silver Eyes, which takes place 10 years after an event that Charlie was connected to. It just seems like that was the implication of what Scott was going for as of FNAF 4. It also suggests that Take Cake was at Fredbear's, potentially Freddy was just being used as a character at Fredbear's. It suggests a lot of stuff, and I want you guys to actually go through it and see what you can get. I'm going to leave the video in the description. I'll leave it at the end of this video so you can go watch it yourself, and let me know what you guys think is and is not canon within his almost solved video. But until next time, mata ne.